Today's pronoun of the day is slugs.
I bet you didn't know that Kurt Cobain was probably trans.
Let's normalize slapping transphobes in 2024.
Woman turns to me who I didn't even know was transgender, and she's like, I'm sorry, but the microaggressions are out of control.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad Polumbo, and welcome back to the Damage Control Podcast, my podcast where we are reclaiming the LGBT community from the insane leftists who've taken it over. Today, we're talking about the rapper Lil Nas X's latest antagonism towards the Christian community, plus more liberal media fear-mongering about LGBT issues, and a huge update on youth gender medicine. Plus, as always, I'll round out the show by reacting to some unhinged TikToks from the alphabet community. If you're new here, do consider subscribing and sticking around. We just passed 100,000 on YouTube. That is such a huge accomplishment, and I'm so excited to have you all here as a part of this community. Now, let's get into it and see what Lil Nas X has done that's got people in such an uproar. So, if you haven't heard of him, Lil Nas X came on the scene with this huge hit song that I actually really liked that was called Old Town Road. It had Billy Ray Cyrus in it. It was honestly kind of cool. But he then came out as gay, and ever since then has become one of those artists that's constantly trying to be transgressive and do things that are antagonistic, in particular towards Christians. So he famously twerked and simulated sex acts with Satan in some of his videos, and now he has released a new single and accompanying music video called J Christ. And I think you can imagine where this one is going. This video is really quite a trip. It shows Lil Nas X dressed up as Jesus in various forms, some of which appear to be in drag. At one point, he has a necklace around him that says sexy. It shows him being crucified. And then it has these incredibly bizarre, very low quality, like what's it called, CGI scenes with him versus the devil or whatever that really actually look cartoonish and aren't very well done. The whole thing is very strange, but the ethos of the song, besides a bunch of sexual innuendo and profanity, is also like that Jesus Christ made the best comeback and now he's here making a comeback or something too, just like Jesus. It's a very strange video, and as soon as I saw it, I knew it was going to ruffle some feathers, and I also knew that that's exactly what he was trying to do. He also posted additional TikToks, including one showing him taking shots of communion wine and then eating a bunch of the communion wafers, which did not go over well with Christian audiences. Now, in the past, when he's done things like twerking on Satan, people have really gotten outraged over it. And there was a good bit of pushback or criticism. But honestly, even I watched all the folks at the Daily Wire, the Candace Owens, the Matt Walsh, the Michael Knowles, even them, they weren't really that fazed by it because it's so obviously attention seeking. And it's so obviously just trying to trigger Christians, trying to thumb his nose at them, trying to get attention to himself. And a couple of them actually made good points that I agreed with, including when they said that he'd never dare do this to the Prophet Muhammad, which I think is definitely true because it would not be received quite so passively, we might say. And the other good point was just that it's nothing new. It's totally unoriginal. They've been doing this for decades in various forms of entertainers trying to be transgressive by going after or mocking Christians, and that he's actually being completely unoriginal in doing this, just that maybe some of his audience is young, so they don't know about all the people that did this in the past. So it didn't even really work. I mean, he got some attention for it, but not nearly as much as I think he expected, and not nearly as much as he got back with the original Satan video. So what you have is a young rapper who's one of the most prominent gay pop artists right now. He's a huge hit, and his sexuality has been at the forefront of the media coverage and the development of his public persona. What you have is him publicly antagonizing Christians and mocking their faith and making videos like bizarrely using their symbols and icons. And you have this all to bring attention to himself or sell, I don't know, get views on his music videos or sell his music because apparently he can't actually just produce good music that people want to listen to without stirring up a bunch of faux outrage. And it's not like he's the only one doing this. We've talked on this channel before about Sam Smith doing, a devil-themed performance at one of those award shows and other things where it seems like many of these pop artists from the LGBT community they're not just like being open and proud and like, I'm gay and I'm not ashamed about it and I'm not, I don't believe the Christian opposition to homosexuality. They're not even just publicly rejecting that. They're going out of their way to antagonize Christians and to mock their faith. In fact, this seems to have gone over poorly, even with enough of Lil Nas's audience, that he's kind of doing an about face and put out a pseudo apology. Let's take a listen to that.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to not necessarily apologize, but I wanted to explain like where my head at and where it's been for like the last week. So first of all, when I did the artwork, I knew like there would be some upset people or whatnot, simply because, religion is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people. But I also didn't mean to like mock. This wasn't like a the Christians, like, it was not that. It was literally me saying, I'm back like Jesus. Like, that was like the whole thing. I'm not the first person to dress up as Jesus. I'm not the first rapper. I'm not the first artist, and I won't be the last. With me eating the crackers and juice, I thought that video was going to be the video to lighten the mood, to take it down like less serious or whatnot. I thought that was something that we all wanted to do as kids or whatnot, but I didn't understand the idea of, the reality of what it is. It's me eating the communion, which is like the symbolism of like Jesus's blood and bones or something like that. I don't remember completely, but I did not mean it as like a cannibalism thing or whatever the freak. I'm not like some evil demon guy trying to destroy everybody's values and stuff like that. That's not me. There's no disrespect there. I thought me clearly not being on the side of the devil in that video was was like there was an understanding there that I'm not like trying to diss Christianity. Yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say for right now. I'm sending you guys love. Sending my fans love. I'm sending the people who I hurt love. Yeah.
So I actually had even less respect for Lil Nas after listening to this apology video, because if you're gonna do something intentionally to troll people, don't back down and gaslight us and pretend like you never meant to offend anyone. With your context and with the history that you literally simulated sex acts with Satan in a music video, nobody's buying that, babe. Nobody. I'd rather see him stick to his guns and actually own it. Like, yeah, I did want to make the Christian community mad and I don't care, than to pretend like he never meant anything mocking or anything about it. Like, come on, give me a break. But I do think it shows that maybe cultural tolerance for this kind of thing is waning a little bit. The fact that he even felt the need to apologize. If I could speak to Lil Nas, I'd just ask him one question. How does what you're doing promote acceptance and tolerance for the LGBT community? How does it further the chances of acceptance and normalization for the people out there? And, it seems like there wouldn't be, but there really are in different pockets of America still, who, because they're gay or because they're transgender, are rejected by their families and can't live a happy life, and are really still struggling to find acceptance, or are openly rejected by society or discriminated against in their communities, or most importantly, in their families. How does this help them? Because I think this kind of antagonism does the opposite. It furthers the divide between religious people and the LGBT community, when I think what we should be trying to do is to mend that divide, to build bridges, and to learn how to coexist, even if we don't all agree, rather than try to troll each other and engage in this never-ending culture war battle. I get that it works for Lil Nas. It gets him more attention and it gets him more money, and he's a rich celebrity, so really, no matter how bad things get for LGBT people in this country, he'll be fine. But I wonder if he realizes how obviously immoral and self-serving it is to do things publicly that inflame tensions and immolate acceptance just to aggrandize yourself and enrich yourself and further your mediocre pop music career. It's a shame because honestly, he's clearly got something to offer. He's really funny on Twitter. Some of his songs I really like. He's clearly got talent, but his career, maybe it was flaming out and maybe he just decided to chase controversy for controversy's sake. I don't know. I don't know the logic or the rationale that put him down this path, but I do know that it's the wrong one. All right, up next, we're going to check in with the ladies over on The View. Yes, The View still airs, and apparently some people still watch it, because one of the hosts at The View has just made one of the most alarmist, absurd statements about Trump that I've ever heard. And trust me, guys, that's saying something. People say crazy stuff about Trump all the time, but this one, it takes the cake. Take a listen to Whoopi doing her thing.
I'm here to say it's ours to lose. It is this country. This is what it's all about. Either you want it to work forward thinking, you want everybody to have the ability to say how they feel, what they want to move forward, or you don't. Or you want somebody who says, I'm going to be on day one, I'm going to be a dictator. Who says it to you, tells you, I'm going to put you people away. I'm going to take all the journalists, I'm going to take all the gay folks, I'm going to move you all around and disappear you. If that's the country you want, you know who to vote for. If that's not the country you want, you have to make a decision.
So folks that follow me and follow my channel and follow my content will know that I'm not a fan and not a supporter of Donald Trump, and I never have been. I criticized him a lot when he was president, and I praised him when he did things I agreed with, of course, but I've never been a fan or a supporter. But I'm also not unhinged and detached from reality like folks like Whoopi seem to be. Donald Trump has never, ever said he would put gay people in camps, or journalists, though he said some pretty aggressive stuff towards journalists and the media. He's never said anything like that about gay people. I don't know where she heard that or if she just pulled it out of her ass. I mean, but it's a completely unfounded statement with no basis in reality. What makes it particularly strange is that as far as Republicans are concerned, Trump, whatever his other faults and issues may be, is pretty pro-gay for a Republican. He made history entering office as the first president to support same-sex marriage, and that's a big deal. He also appointed gay people to top-level positions in his administration, like Rick Grinnell most prominently, and actually launched a global initiative, a diplomatic initiative, to decriminalize homosexuality worldwide. So he was already president for 4 years, and we know what he did related to gay people, and while there were some things I disagreed with, particularly on trans issues, he never put anyone into camps or did anything even 1/100th as anti-gay or aggressive or dramatic as what Whoopi is describing. But here we have a massively popular celebrity and liberal TV host telling her viewers that if Trump gets back in power, he will put gay people in camps. Seriously, Whoopi? Seriously? Whenever I see stuff like this, I always wonder, have they learned absolutely nothing? Have they learned nothing? Because they did this throughout his first campaign and his first presidency, constantly with the alarmism and exaggeration. And the most frustrating part about that is not just that it's wrong and dumb and scares people needlessly, but also that it discredits the legitimate criticisms and pushback that Trump should be getting when so many of his loudest and most prominent critics are so utterly, utterly untethered from reality. But who knows? Maybe she's right, and I'll be broadcasting this podcast in just a year's time from inside a gay concentration camp. Hey guys, Brad cutting in here because we just wrapped another episode of the Based Politics Podcast, my politics podcast that I co-host with Hannah Cox.
That's right. This week we discuss Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy coming under attack by both Republicans and Democrats. Plus, Utah is getting sued over a new terrible social media bill. And do you have to pay your debt? We respond to a crazy TikTok.
Head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube to join us for the Base Politics Podcast now. Speaking of media fear-mongering, you may have seen headlines, if you follow the LGBT news, warning about a huge wave of, quote, anti-LGBT bills being introduced into state legislatures across the country. For example, The Advocate, which is one of the biggest LGBT news websites in the country, just ran a headline that says 285 anti-LGBTQ bills are introduced in state legislatures already this year, and it's still just January. The story reads, after a record year for anti-LGBTQ plus legislation at the state level, 2024 is shaping up to be just as challenging. In 2023, more than 550 anti-LGBTQ plus bills were introduced across 43 states, and more than 80 were passed into law. So far in the new year, 285 have been introduced, according to the ACLU. Transgender people across the country are enduring a historic and dangerous effort to control our bodies and our lives, fueled by extremist politics with the goal of erasing us from public life, ACLU attorney Harper Seldon told The Hill. Taken together, these proposals are a blatant effort to deny transgender people the freedom to be ourselves at school, at work, and the support of the medical care many of us need to live. So this sounds really bad. 284 anti-LGBT bills introduced in just 2.5 weeks so far in January. Wow, that's a ton. People should be scared. They should be building bunkers for when they start knocking on our doors and rounding us up for the camps. This is crisis red alarm level territory. There's just a couple huge problems with this alarmist narrative. The first is that this data tracks bills that are being introduced, not bills that are being passed or have any chance of remotely ever becoming law. So, for example, just thousands upon thousands of bills are introduced every year, and most of them go absolutely nowhere. In New Hampshire, for example, they have 400 members of their state house. So if just one of them wrote up a bill, even if 399 others disagreed with it and it was doomed to never go absolutely anywhere, they would count that. The other huge problem is what they're counting as anti-LGBT is so broad and encapsulates so much common sense, reasonable legislation devoid of any animus or bigotry that it is completely and utterly meaningless. So many of the bills labeled anti-LGBTQ plus legislation by the ACLU and by their media sycophants are actually things that many LGBT people ourselves, like myself, a gay person, would support. I went to the ACLU's website and I looked at their full index of all this legislation, and I wasn't about to go through every single one of these 284 bills, but I just looked at the first 5 or so. One of the first ones that came up was an Alaska law because it's by alphabetical order. And this bill, which is supposedly an attack on the LGBT community, simply designates that public schools and private schools whose teams compete against a public school must designate their school-sponsored athletic teams or sports either a male's team, a female's team, or a co-ed or mixed team. Basically, it requires that unless it's a co-ed league where everyone enters voluntarily going in and knowing that, people have to play sports according to their birth sex, not their gender identity. That's something that a vast majority of the country just views as common sense, given the biological realities and differences between males and females that both for safety and fairness reasons don't entirely go away, and as a result, do require sex segregation in sports. This isn't some undue act of discrimination against the trans community. It's not an attack on the dignity and lives of trans people across the country. It's just common sense rules for school sports to protect and preserve women's sports as a separate and meaningful category. That's something a lot of gay people and even a good chunk of trans people actually agree with. It's also not inherently bigoted or hateful in any way. So if they're counting stuff like this as anti-LGBT, I'm really not sure that's a meaningful or significant or serious category at all. I kept looking, though, and another one of these supposedly bigoted laws was an Arizona bill that defines sex under law as follows. An individual's sex means the individual's biological sex at birth, either male or female. A female is an individual whose biological reproductive system is developed to produce ova, and a male is an individual whose biological reproductive system is developed to fertilize the ova of a female. Yep, so that's just a bill defining biological sex in a factual and objectively true manner under state law. And that's an anti-LGBT bill now. That's hate and bigotry to correctly and accurately define biological sex under law. You guys can go back in the archives and check out my conversation with PhD biologist Colin Wright, where we dive deep into biological sex and the reality of it and what it means. And he explains that this is essentially a correct definition of biological sex. Yet according to the ACLU and to woke LGBT media outlets, it is a bigoted attack on LGBT people to pass bills that accurately define words in state law. Another one of these bills was another Arizona bill that was about parental consent and notice in schools around issues related to gender identity and human sexuality. So this one says parents must be notified 2 weeks before any activity, class, or program that includes content involving gender identity, human reproduction, or sexual matters. And they must provide written permission for the child to participate in that activity, class, or program. That same bill also prohibits schools from denying information about their child to parents unless, quote, a reasonably prudent person would believe that disclosure of the information would result in child abuse or neglect as defined under state law. This is all just parental rights 101, right? This is just parents having autonomy and control over their children's education. It is not inherently anti-LGBT. In fact, it applies to a lot more than just LGBT issues. And one might agree or disagree with the approach outlined in this bill, which again is just a proposal, not something that's actually necessarily going to become law, but it's not inherently hateful or bigoted. It's not even particularly targeted at the LGBT community. It does apply to a lot of like trans-related issues, but it also applies to a whole host of other things that aren't directly related to the LGBT community. So these are just 3 of the examples that came up in the first few results I went over on their supposed list of 284 anti-LGBT bills. And as a gay person who's like center-right, moderate, I'm not a social conservative even, right? I'm not some religious trad. I can say that all 3 of these bills at least seem either like common sense anyone would support or something that is arguably defensible and not inherently bigoted. So to me, the whole 284 thing is just a list of policies that aren't in alignment with their left-wing priorities. It's not really a meaningful list of hate-fueled bills openly discriminating against people or anything in the way that it's being portrayed in the media. It's a nasty combination of fear-mongering and weaponizing people's genuine concern for the LGBT community to push what's essentially just a Democratic partisan policy agenda. I reject this out of hand, and I think it's a real shame that people who the LGBT community trusts to be an accurate source of information are so grossly deceiving them in this way. All right, one quick story I also want to touch on with you guys is an update in the debate over youth gender medicine, which you'll remember I discussed with Nalia last week on this very podcast. One question that came up was whether there is strong evidence for medically transitioning minors. You'll often hear advocates of this practice, which I oppose. They say things like, the studies all show it's safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. Now, I don't think the studies all show that. I think actually the evidence for that is very disputable and very low quality, and that's why we're seeing European nations and health authorities putting out a very different message based on their review of the evidence. And that's now even extending to global medical and health authorities like the WHO, the World Health Organization. And if you're not familiar with it, the WHO is not some right-wing or conservative-led institution. It is very much an establishment, neoliberal, geopolitical institution that throughout the COVID pandemic, for example, parroted the kind of talking points you would expect from a Dr. Fauci. And yet, the WHO just acknowledged that the evidence for youth gender transition is minimal and contradictory. As National Review reports, the science is moving away from considering gender-affirming care as the settled and best way to treat children and adolescents experiencing gender confusion. In fact, even the World Health Organization just admitted this truth. Here's the background. WHO was preparing to push gender-affirming care as the standard of care for treating dysphoric children, but after getting intense pushback, it backed down and made a cogent admission that should materially impact this debate going forward. National Review then points out this excerpt from the WHO fact sheet on the development of a guideline on the health of trans and gender diverse people. Quote, "The scope of the guidance will cover adults only and not address the needs of children and adolescents, because on review, the evidence base for children and adolescents is limited and variable regarding the longer-term outcomes of gender-affirming care for children and adolescents." That's genuinely huge, guys, to have a massive global health organization with a strong establishment and liberal bias declining to endorse gender-affirming care for minors or to advocate for it because they say the evidence for it is limited and variable, which means code for mixed, meaning there's lots of evidence suggesting it's not good, and there's some evidence suggesting maybe it does work, and we don't know. And again, this only further serves to re-enshrine my position that when it comes to something so drastic as denying people their lifelong fertility when they're at a very young age, we should not be doing that when there's so little evidence, and the evidence that we do have is so mixed about whether it's actually best for them in the long run. All right, everybody, that's enough serious talk for one podcast. Now let's head to everybody's favorite segment of the show, where I react to unhinged TikToks from the alphabet people. Up first, new pronouns just dropped, and they might be the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard.
Today's pronoun of the day is slug slugs. Why would someone want to use slug slugs pronouns? Well, maybe this person feels like discovering this person's gender is very slow and maybe won't ever discover it, and that can happen. But maybe also they like slugs, and that's okay. That's awesome. Maybe there's some kind of beauty to it, just like what I had described with feeling like discovering a gender is very slow, and that's awesome. That's beautiful. Using neopronouns is a beautiful thing, honestly, when you feel like you can't relate to gender. And these are most typically used by neurodivergent individuals who do have a hard time relating to gender. So is that this person's fault? No. Is this gonna harm you? No. Does this make them a slug? No. So I really hope that you can just try to show some respect and love towards another human being. It's so important. This is just a word. This is just something that feels more comfortable than hearing he, him, she, her, or even they, them sometimes. And so I hope that makes more sense.
Y'all, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is anybody else here with me, like just feeling like they're actually going insane? I'm not calling you a slug, babe. That's literally not even a pronoun. Like, by basic grammar, a slug is a noun, not a pronoun. Not only is this extremely bizarre that somebody would want to be referred to as a slug, a non-human that is greasy and slow and oily and considered most people to be gross, but we're also just destroying the English language as we know it to do this. And where I fundamentally disagree with this woman is that I don't actually think it is respectful or kind to enable this kind of bizarre behavior or request that's clearly driven by deep confusion or internal issues. There's a world of difference between being accommodating and referring to genuinely trans people who have gender dysphoria and who live and present as a woman, for example, as a she, and calling someone a slug who isn't and doesn't even come close to appearing as a slug. I'm not doing it, babe, and nobody else is. You really need, I don't know if maybe you're just getting like the TikTok creativity fund dollars for this stuff because you know it's engagement bait, but you need to put down the crack pipe and stop lumping this insanity in with the LGBT community. You're giving us all a bad name, and crazy ideas and advocacy like this are what's dragging down and holding back our community these days. Up next, this trans activist feels entitled to retroactively declare historical figures as actually transgender.
I bet you didn't know that Kurt Cobain was probably trans. Here's why. First off, Kurt wore a lot of women's clothing. And when asked about this, they replied that they wore dresses all the time because they felt comfortable and free. And just look at Kurt in these pictures. They look so happy. And in an interview about their childhood, Kurt said that they mostly hung out around girls and that at one point they thought they might be gay. Many trans people who don't have the vocabulary yet to express their gender identity will describe what they're feeling as being gay. That's exactly what I did in middle school. Kurt is also quoted as saying that they identify more with the feminine than with the masculine. This is clear proof that Kurt did not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. And the most convincing evidence that Kurt was trans was in an early version of Nirvana's All Apologies lyrics, where Kurt wrote, "Let me grow some." That is clear-cut gender dysphoria. And of course, Kurt will never be able to tell us themselves, but the evidence makes it pretty obvious they were trans. That might be why Kurt's no longer with us. Maybe Kurt knew that we weren't ready.
You know that this shit was crazy because even the TikTok comments were roasting this person. Even TikTok, when you've lost TikTok. No, babe, I didn't know that because it's not a fact. It's something you just made up. It's hilarious to me that the same people who say, "Don't assume my gender," feel entitled to go back in history and assume people's gender that they had a medical condition they were never diagnosed with or communicated any sign of having because of a few things about them that were unorthodox or gender non-conforming. Also, like wearing a dress or women's clothing doesn't make you a woman. It doesn't make you trans. That's such a shallow and actually deeply misogynistic way of defining gender and gender identity. It's very possible that Kurt Cobain was just a weird artist dude who liked to dress differently and eccentric and quirky and do some traditionally feminine things. There's really not much to go on with this weird woke conspiracy theory, but it's also just insensitive, rude, hypocritical to go about and try to retcon somebody's gender identity to frankly suit your own interests or ideology or fetish. But this is the same TikToker who goes around filming random employees at restaurants, many of whom clearly don't speak good English, and tries to get them in trouble with their bosses or even fired for misgendering them. So I cannot say I'm surprised. Up next, yet again, we have more radical trans activists calling for violence against people who disagree with them.
Let's normalize slapping transphobes in 2024. I don't care if you're a man or a woman, like, you're gonna get hit if you start talking shit to me or my friends. It's not okay. Like, and not only that, this chick on this video is like talking about the N-word and using the T-slur and like all that fucking rhetoric in one. And of course she's like drunk, like I'm sure a lot of that's alcohol, but still, like, you trying to get hit or what, girl? Because I'm sorry, like at a certain point it's what you deserve. And in this video they chase down my friend like after they've walked away, and they even had the audacity to go and change into like hoodies like they were trying to fuck fight. Of course, initiating violence can always lead to a more like dangerous situation, but like I'm just saying, if you've got like an even number or like, I don't know, and slap a bitch, slap a transphobe today.
Y'all, call me crazy, but I still hold the radical view that it is wrong, insane, and dangerous for a man to be advocating for hitting women. The fuck? Now, look, to be clear, in the video this guy is responding to, you have these drunk girls hurling insults at apparently some trans people. It's like, that's clearly unacceptable behavior. Like, they deserve to be criticized for it. That's not cool. But just because somebody says nasty things to you does not ever give you the right to initiate violence against them. And this is something you see a lot from trans activists advocating this: punch a TERF, slap a transphobe. And I'll just say this: you never have a right to physically hurt somebody because you don't like their words. And if society were ever to embrace that tortured and deranged logic, we would quickly tear ourselves apart into shreds, because if everybody can fight each other and physically attack each other for saying things the other person doesn't like, you can't have a democracy. You can't have a liberal society where people of different faiths and beliefs and ideas and political expressions and identities all live in one country. You just have an all-out war. And it's particularly ironic to see people who advocate such fringe minority extreme viewpoints also advocate for the use of violence against unpopular words and ideas. You're not doing the math, babe. Your math isn't mathing. You're not thinking this through. It's insane. It's crazy. But of course, I can't say center-right rational opinions on TikTok without getting banned for the 4th time or whatever. But people like this can openly advocate for violence against women in the name of social justice. Make it make sense. Up next, this TikTok story from a gay guy who is not conservative by any means, is woke himself, about a bad run-in he had with some transgender customers at a restaurant. Was pretty interesting. So take a listen.
I was just called transphobic at work after going up to this table and being like, are you guys all set to get a drink order? I get their drinks. I come back. I'm like, are you guys all set to order some food? I get the food order during the meal. I'm like, how is everything going, guys? No issues. Then at the end, I'm like, are you guys all set, ready to pay? This woman turns to me, who I didn't even know was transgender, and she's like, I'm sorry, but the microaggressions are out of control. I use she, her pronouns. My partner also does, and we are transgender women, and we will not be called guys. I'm just staring at them like, are you being serious? So I start trying to reiterate, like, no, I just say to parties of 2 or more, like, guys, like, are you guys all set to order? I've been using it all day. It has nothing to do with gender. I'm a part of the LGBTQ. I have no, like, intentions of being transphobic. This woman gets all red and angry, and she's like, you can be gay and still be transphobic. So by her logic, I'm like, ma'am, I'm just saying, like, what makes you think that I'm gay? I could be a different part of the LGBTQ. It's the same thing with you guys. Like, and she's literally like, there it is again. You just said guys. And I'm like, ma'am, I'm seriously not doing it as a gender thing. It's just like a group thing. This woman goes on a tangent to me about how I shouldn't be trying to justify myself. I should just say sorry and not be transphobic. How am I transphobic?
You know, guys, I do wonder sometimes, like, how crazy does this all have to get before the woke gays realize that they are tying themselves to a sinking ship? This is one of the dumbest complaints I've ever heard, and it's not the first time I've heard it either. This was something that, like, feminist girls, not even trans, just like feministy women used to say, like, don't call us guys. It's like really dumb, really annoying. Guys has become a completely gender neutral term. It's like y'all, it's like you all in its meaning, and it projects a real level of entitlement and insecurity to be freaking out at somebody because they call you guys. If you were a trans person who was actually confident in your sense of self and your gender identity, this would not bother you. I'm sorry. You're projecting insecurity. You're just projecting insecurity and inadequacy. Like, you think you really are a guy, so it's so bothersome to be lumped up into a group called guys, even though it's not actually being done in any sort of gendered way. That's a you problem that you need to work on and look internally to reflect on and fix, not take it out on some random liberal gay who's doing everything he can to be as politically correct as possible and just can't quite keep up with your ever-changing and ever more extreme and radical demands. Also, y'all, please never, ever use the term microaggression unironically. It is such a ridiculous concept, and you must completely lack the emotional stability and resilience of a functioning adult human if minor verbal tics feel like a form of aggression to you. Once again, that's a you problem, babe. And if you can't handle being in public because minor phrases or the way people say certain things is so upsetting to you, isolate yourself and get therapy and seek help and come back to the rest of us when you're ready to be an adult. Until then, please stop. All right, guys, that's all the woke TikTok I can handle in one day without incurring permanent brain damage. So drop a like if you enjoyed this, or at least if you got some sick sense of pleasure out of watching me suffer. Do consider subscribing and comment and let me know what your favorite part of the podcast was, which one of these TikToks or the other topics you enjoyed the most. And with that, I'll see you all next week on Damage Control. But if you enjoyed this video and you're somehow not sick of me yet, you can go here or here to check out my other recent content that you might just enjoy.